Today, Paddington Station plays host to a handful of standardized designs. The HSTs are primary top link power, a role they share on numerous main lines around the network. The ubiquitous Class 47s are the main diesel-electric design on the few remaining locomotive haul duties throughout the country. Local services are still in the hands of first-generation diesel multiple units. Indeed, none of these classes can claim any particular uniqueness to the Western region. Each have operated at various times throughout the country. This standardization is new to the Western. Up until the 1960s, the region possessed a unique range of motive power classes, both steam and diesel. For a few short months during 1962, the last of the Kings operated alongside the newly introduced Western diesel hydraulics. In this, the first of a series of programs, we'll look back at various aspects of steam on this remarkably varied region. The classic train shed at Paddington was completed in 1854 to a design by Brunel. Although the station was subsequently extended, the basic overall roof has changed little over the years. Traffic from the terminus increased steadily until the 1930s. At this time, a total of 72 mainline trains left these platforms each day for destinations from the southwest of England to Wales and Birmingham. Almost 30 years later, these designs were still at work at the terminus. In 1960, steam continued to dominate the workings into and out of the station. 10 of these condensing 9700 tanks were built for work in the tunnels of the Metropolitan Railway. They were shedded at Old Oak, and also worked empty coaching stock to and from the station. These train reporting numbers were unique to the Western region and were used until the end of 1962. Foy Castle was one of the last of this classic Great Western design, entering service just after nationalisation. At this time, the Kings still worked from Paddington to the West Country, to Bristol and to Birmingham. The class was the largest of the Great Western designs. They're distinguished visually from the castles by the leading bogies, which are fitted with one inside and one outside set of wheel bearings. The 8400s were one of the last designs of pannier tank, built well into the 1950s. As a result, they had very short lives, in some cases less than 10 years. Goodrich Castle backs onto a rake of coaches just brought in from the carriage sidings at Old Oak. The castles were the principal Great Western Express design for a period of around 30 years. The first was introduced in 1923, with 5014 appearing as one of the earlier batches. On the other hand, 7023 Penrice Castle was one of the last batch built by the newly nationalised British Railways and appearing in 1950. (7023) is departing on a Hereford-bound train. These were to be the last express passenger duties in the hands of steam on the Western region. The 1500 class was a Great Western design of pannier introduced in 1949. They were intended as 24-hour shunting engines, requiring the minimum of maintenance. Note the rare combination of a chocolate and cream coach with an early example of a B4 bogie. Sudeley Castle is working the 1115 to Hereford. From Paddington, the main line heads due west along a complex of approach lines. For a short distance, the Metropolitan tracks run to the north of the main line before crossing under and heading south at Subway Junction. Westbourne Park is situated near this junction and provided an ideal vantage point to view steam working to and from Old Oak Common, as well as on the main line itself. At this time, the Kings were in their last year of operation. The last were to be withdrawn at the end of the 1962 timetable. The Cheltenham Spa Express, also known as the Cheltenham Flyer, was at one time the world's fastest train. The Western diesel hydraulics had only just entered service. Note the bell mounted above the buffer beam on 6000 King George V. This 1500 tank is employed on carriage pilot duties to and from Old Oak. Incidentally, one of this class is now preserved on the Severn Valley Railway. The Western region were allowed to paint coaches in chocolate and cream for use on named trains. To allow the extensive use of such a colour scheme, the Western merely produced a vast number of named express workings. We've now moved a few miles to the west to Ealing Broadway. Castle Class 5066 was renamed Sir Felix Pole in 1956. Note the flat-sided Hawksworth tender. The maze of fast, slow and carriage lines was centred on Old Oak Common and a series of junctions. Here, the freight link through Kensington Olympia crosses, while spurs connect the former Great Western Line to North Pole Junction. A considerable amount of traffic originates from the carriage sidings, and Old Oak Depot is seen in the distance. The location has changed little since the days of steam. Then, as now, a vast number of light engine and empty carriage movements use the lines into the yards and depot. In the days of steam, Old Oak was the largest depot on the Western region. The steam shed was situated near to the Western Main Line to Paddington and was bordered on its northern side by the Grand Union Canal. These rare scenes were taken early in 1946, just after the war, but just before nationalisation. County number 1011 had entered service in January 1946, but had not yet been named. These Swindon-built engines were the most powerful of the Great Western two-cylinder passenger designs. An ex-works castle stands in front of a pair of Churchward's mixed-traffic 280s. Note the Duke dog. These were closely associated with the Cambrian lines, although this example was probably allocated to Didcot shed. Old Oak Common was a relatively modern shed, being opened in 1906. It was to remain open for steam until 1965. The large shed contained 4 electrically operated turntables. These were all interconnected under one huge roof. The workshops alongside undertook heavy repairs. Top Link veteran posed for the camera. The Old Oak Commons breakdown crane is moved into the shed yard by a Churchward mogul. These young train spotters are now in their mid-50s. This coal stage is a typical Great Western feature. Tubs of coal were manually manoeuvred to load a tender. Such a feature is now being preserved at the Didcot Railway Centre. These frequently filthy jobs associated with steam are part of a way of life that's now disappeared. These Great Western engines didn't benefit from the use of rocking or drop grates. As a result, clinker had to be cleared out manually through the firebox door. The shed at Old Oak was closed to steam on the 22nd of March 1965. The shed housing the turntables was demolished and a diesel depot built over the site. One of these turntables was in fact retained, although it's now open to the skies and free from the steam and smoke of 30 years ago. Old Oak maintains a large number of carriage sidings located alongside the depot and running parallel with the main line. The retaining wall on the right marks the course of the Union Canal. From Old Oak, the former Great Western Main Line heads west towards Reading. This section follows the Thames Valley through Maidenhead, Slough and Twyford. This line was claimed by Brunel, the Great Western's chief engineer, to be the finest work in England. Indeed, Brunel ensured that it was produced with no steep grades or sharp curves, thus enabling high-speed running. Furthermore, unlike the other routes from the capital, it was engineered to accommodate the 7-foot gauge adopted by Brunel. Sonning cutting is the largest of the engineering features on the section from Paddington to Reading, and provided a classic location for steam. Although the line has been re-signalled and the track layouts rationalised, many of the wayside stations remain in a fine state of preservation. The station at Taplow was opened in 1872 and follows the classic Great Western Station layout of a large island platform and up and down platforms either side, serving fast and slow lines. The covered footbridge is another Great Western feature and dates from 1884. Burnham, in contrast, consists of one island platform serving only the slow lines. Although this section of line was opened in 1838, many of these stations date from the late 1900s, when the route was quadrupled. In true Great Western style, a number of branches diverged from the main line. Note the two unfitted mineral wagons and flat wagon conveying an invalid carriage in this mixed train. A classic combination of an auto coach and 1400 tank heads away from the junction towards Marlow. Although of antique appearance, the 1400s were actually introduced relatively recently and dated from 1932. Their general size and arrangement is, however, in direct descent from the 517 class of the 1860s. Maidenhead was the junction for both the Marlow and High Wycombe services. The largest junction west of Paddington is at Reading. This large station is at the point where the former Great Western routes to Bristol and the west of England via Newbury diverge. It also handles cross-country traffic to and from the southern via Basingstoke. We now go back to this busy location during the last years of steam. Goodrich Castle heads west from the station with a Hereford-bound train. The Manners were the smallest of the Great Western two-cylinder 460s. They were introduced during the period 1938 to 1939, with a further batch appearing in 1950. Unsuccessful in operational service at first, later drafting modifications to the class in the 1950s greatly improved their performance. They were mostly associated with the Cambrian lines, and were rare performers in the London area, with the nearest being allocated at Tyseley. Reading has seen considerable rebuilding in recent years. Despite this, the station is still very similar to the layout during the last years of steam. However, the surrounding town has been transformed by the arrival of the office blocks. Today, these structures dominate Brunel's main line of the 1840s. From Reading, Brunel's line to Bristol heads northwest along the Thames Valley. This line was one of 3 former Great Western routes running from Reading. To the southwest, the Basingstoke line; to the west, the Berks and Hants line; and to the northwest, the original Great Western route to Didcot and Bristol. On this northerly route, a number of delightful wayside stations serve the communities along the Thames Valley. Like those on the main line between Paddington and Reading, these seem to have escaped change and remain much as they did in the days of the Great Western. The station at Chelsea is a typical example, dating from 1892, and was once the junction for the 2 3/4 mile branch to Wallingford. The first station north of Reading is at Tilehurst. A haul heads north on a freight from Old Oak. A milk train heads north behind a castle. The full brake in the train is being used to convey milk churns. Note the pallet van behind the locomotive. This unsuccessful design of wagon was very short-lived in service. This section of line saw a number of cross-country trains working from Oxford to the southern region. These were mostly in the hands of Bullard Pacifics. We've now moved to the next station north of Tilehurst, at Pangbourne. Didcot is the next large station and junction on the main line to Bristol, and acts as an interchange for local services to Oxford and Reading. We'll now go back to Didcot of 30 years ago. The station saw a considerable number of local workings to and from Swindon, Reading and Oxford, while in addition, trains for the former Didcot, Newbury and Southampton line terminated here. The station is bypassed on its east side by the direct line to Oxford. Until 1962, the Lord Nelsons made regular appearances. Old Oak Common was the main shed of a number of sub-sheds located on the line through Reading to Didcot and Oxford. In 1963, all, with the exception of Slough, remained open to steam. While that at Old Oak was demolished to make way for a diesel depot, the shed at Southall remained intact and in use as a stabling point for diesel multiple units until the late 1980s. These scenes were taken just before closure on the 3rd of January 1966. By this time, the depot was mostly the preserve of the standard classes and engines awaiting scrap. The shed was situated at the point where the Brentford branch diverged to the southeast, with the yards and buildings alongside the Paddington mainline. The depot played host to a large number of scrapped engines, with, in addition to the Great Western designs, a number of LMS classes. Three years before, the shed had an active allocation of former GWR power, although Clun Castle was a visitor from Old Oak Common. The major station and junction at Reading was the site of the next shed. 81D was situated a mile to the west of General Station by the junction for the Newbury line. Closure came on the 4th of January 1965, and the large 9-track shed was later demolished and replaced by a diesel depot. The next shed north of Reading was at Didcot, again situated within a number of junctions, in this case the Oxford and Reading lines. Closure to steam came on April the 5th, 1965, but the shed was to become the base for the Great Western Locomotive Society. 25 years later, Didcot preserves the atmosphere of the days of the Great Western steam shed. On this occasion, the centre boasted two classic Great Western outside frame designs in steam, City of Truro and Duke Dog number 3217. The depot was officially reopened in March 1982 as part of the 21st anniversary of the Great Western Society. Today, the depot has an allocation of over 100 locomotives and rolling stock. Two sheds on the Western Main Line from Paddington were to remain open until January 1966. One was Southall, the other Oxford. Oxford's Great Western shed was situated just to the north of the station and to the west of the main line. In 1963, former Great Western classes were still very much in evidence. However, by late 1965, they were in a minority and overshadowed by a number of standard and LMS classes. By the time these scenes were taken on the 22nd of December 1965, steam on the western region was in its last days. A Black 5 approaches the station on a Bournemouth train. Here it will be replaced by a southern loco. Indeed, Oxford was one of the few places where engines from all four of the pre-nationalisation companies could be seen. Former LNER locos once worked in from Cambridge, but by this time, such duties had disappeared. A filthy haul heads south for Reading. With the closure of Oxford Shed on the 3rd of January 1966, steam operation on the western main lines from Paddington finally came to an end. The period from 1966 to 1968 saw the running of a number of steam specials on the lines through Reading and Oxford. Clun Castle was a regular performer. On the 4th of March 1967, she hauled a special from Banbury to mark the end of through services from Paddington to Birmingham Snow Hill and Birkenhead. She's seen here departing Banbury on the first leg of the journey to Snow Hill. Clun Castle was a regular site at Banbury. Indeed, this location was to retain an allocation of steam well into 1966. Motive power was by this time restricted mostly to Black 5s and 9Fs. Another regular performer at this time was Pendennis Castle. She also made a return trip to Birkenhead on March the 4th, 1967, to mark the end of through services. Taplow on the Paddington to Reading line was the site of 2 annual open days held by the Great Western Society. Pendennis Castle was one of several engines on display in the former goods yard on the 17th of September 1966. In conjunction with this event, Cookham Manor ran a special train from Birmingham New Street. It's over 20 years since the last regular steam workings on Brunel's classic main line from Paddington. Since then, 2 generations of mainline motive power have operated on this former Great Western route. The diesel hydraulics were to work alongside steam for a few short years. Their preeminence was, however, to be short-lived. By the 1970s, they had mostly been replaced by more conventional diesel designs. Today, the HSTs dominate the mainline services out of Paddington, a role once in the hands of the kings and castles. Interestingly, one aspect of the motive power scene has seen little change. The DMU fleet, which first appeared in the late 1950s, still operates local and suburban services. It was this same generation of units which worked alongside the classic designs from the Great Western, which once plied their way west from Paddington.